Actually, in today's industrial societies, you have another form, the so-called wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, just as you have all these Madai Wildlife Sanctuary and Bhagwan Mahavir National Park and so on in the Western Ghats of Goa. But interestingly enough, many of these are earlier hunting preserves of Maharajas, not here in Goa, but certainly the next one to the Madai Wildlife Sanctuary in Maharashtra is the Radhanagari Wildlife Sanctuary, which was the hunting preserve of the Maharaja of Kolhapur. And further south, if you go into Karnataka, the major sanctuary of Bandipur was the hunting preserve of Maharaja of Mysore. So you have had this kind of an evolution. And what were ways in which these conservation measures were implemented? As societies integrated, brought in their fold larger and larger areas and larger human populations, the measures which were used shifted from religious prescriptions to social conventions to legal enforcement today, and interestingly new kinds such as positive incentives are emerging. So there are now systems of so-called conservation service charges. Anyway, so much as a case study of sacred grounds. I quickly go over pastoralism, but maybe I should break. If you have any questions, any issues, pastoralism, I need not go into also if there are a lot of questions. Would you like to intervene? Would you like to talk about any of this? As I said, I have tried to show that there are very different attitudes historically towards sacred grounds, very different ways of interpreting, a whole range of evidences, methodologies are possible. This is what I was trying to convey, including even mathematical modeling to anthropological and other kinds of evidence. So, if you would like to intervene and get in a discussion, you can do so. Okay, if not, let me quickly talk about pastoralism, which I have also been interested in for some time. And I want again to talk about a whole range of evidences from archaeological, human genetic, linguistic, anthropological, geographical, epidemiological, ecological, which can be put in. Now, I am talking about pastoralism in terms of specialist herders, that is communities which depend at least very significantly, if not exclusively, on maintaining cattle, sheep, buffaloes and so on. And on the Western Ghats, one particular group which I have studied, which is of course also present in Goa, called Dhangars, and they maintain buffaloes in the forest. So the proportion of buffalo numbers is declining. They maintain cattle, and recently they have started maintaining goats. But you can see that the cattle and the buffaloes which they maintain together, they come from two very different directions. Archaeological evidence tells us that the cattle were domesticated in the Middle East and came to India through northwest, and the buffalo in Southeast Asia and came to India through the northeast. And presumably, eventually, they have come together as two components of these. But we'll talk a little bit later also. The buffalo is also, because maybe it is a demon coming from, an animal coming from another culture, is Mahishasura. And there are many places where the buffalo is ritually sacrificed to Kali. Yeah, I guess during Navaratri, which is on now, there are places till recently, now through various legal and other measures, that practice has more or less ceased. But in Shirsi, not far from here, there are these big buffaloes still kept tied in the Durga temple, which were earlier every year sacrificed to this goddess. So the Dravidian speakers, this is population genetic evidence which I tried to summarize, brought in the cattle and the wheat, and the Indo-Tibetan speakers, they brought in rice and buffalo from the other side, and then you have an amalgamation in India developing a certain kind of pastoralism. And the Indo-Europeans, which is of course the language of Goa, Maharashtra, much of North India, is language which was brought in much later by another group of people who brought with them horses and iron, which allowed large-scale cultivation. I wanted to talk about one particular story. So it's a narrative actually which I tried to develop. This is in the Mawad region, which is part of the Western Ghats and the immediate area to the east of the crest line of the Western Ghats in Pune, Satara districts of Maharashtra. And in the tradition of Kosambi's living prehistory, you can actually see in this region people staying in different parts of the topography, in a sense inhabiting different niches, following different patterns of resource use. In the valleys you have the Marathas with large-scale paddy cultivation. On the slopes you have Kodis with some shifting cultivation, small-scale paddy cultivation. And today on the hill plateaus, the saras of that area, you have the Dhangars. And we tried again in Kosambi's tradition. In fact, he talks about some of the deities which we studied in greater detail. This Bapuji Boa he talks about. Anyway, so there is this deity of Marathas who were later arrivals. The Kodis and the Dhangars were clearly the earlier inhabitants from many lines of evidence. And there is this goddess Shirkai, which is the goddess of Marathas. And actually, in the temples and the deities of one particular valley of Moshe river, which we studied in great detail, you can see people talking about all the various conflicts. That Shirkai came and asked Wagzai to be allowed to sit by her side, and Wagzai refused, and then Shirkai and her worshippers fought, and they drove the Dhangars from the valley to the hilltop and so on. And the Kodis, the Bapuji Boa asked that he wanted Shirkai in marriage, and Shirkai got very angry. And then Shirkai and Bapuji Boa had a fight, and Bapuji Boa has been thrown out. Anyway, you can actually, in fact, I did not go in depth, but in almost every Western Ghats, relatively more remote locality, I have encountered such stories of conflicts amongst the deities of the different communities, and those clearly depict what had historically happened. Another very interesting line of evidence comes from the way the specialist sheep keepers, shepherds, and the specialist buffalo keepers. So in Maharashtra, they are both called Dhangars. The shepherds are the Mendke or Hatkar Dhangars, and the buffalo keepers are the Maske or Gaudi Dhangars. Today you can see in the drier tracts, it is specialist shepherd, and in the wetter tract, the specialist buffalo keepers. But when oral histories, we try to get at their understanding of their own lineages and how those lineages have changed over historical time. There are many lines of evidence which say that earlier the herders were primarily in the larger river valleys, like that of the Krishna river on the Deccan plateau, and they were keeping both sheep and buffaloes and cattle, and then as agriculture came